The white chalk line was not part of the ceremony. Clara Bennett noticed it before she noticed the banners, before she noticed the polished treaty table, before she noticed the silver goblets arranged beneath the high windows of Ironvale Hall. It was thin, almost careless. A pale mark dragged across the black stone floor from the foot of the signing platform to the exact place where the Alpha King would stand when he lowered his hand to the treaty parchment. To anyone else, it was dust. To Clara, it was a direction. She stopped with a bundle of fresh candles tucked against her chest. Only for a heartbeat. A maid in Ironvale Castle did not stop where nobles could see her. She moved, or she bowed, or she became part of the wall. Standing still meant someone might ask why. Looking too closely meant someone might decide she had forgotten her place. And in rooms built for kings, a servant's place was usually somewhere small, silent, and easy to remove. So Clara lowered her eyes and stepped forward. Her shoe crossed the white line. A cold feeling moved through her stomach. The mark had not been there at dawn. She knew because she had scrubbed this floor herself, knees aching against the stone, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers raw from ash soap and winter water. She had cleaned beneath the signing platform while the first light came through the high windows. She had polished the black stone until the reflection of the chandeliers trembled in it like trapped stars. There had been no chalk line then. Clara was 23, pale-skinned, soft-faced, with warm brown hair pinned beneath a plain servant's cap and a cream linen dress hidden beneath a white apron. People sometimes called her pretty when they thought she could not hear. Pretty in the gentle, harmless way. Pretty like a cup placed neatly on a shelf. Pleasant enough to notice once, never important enough to remember. She had learned to accept that kind of invisibility. It kept her fed. It kept her alive. She moved to the platform and set the candles into their iron holders one by one. Her hands did not shake. They had no right to. Hands were the first thing people noticed when a servant was afraid. Shaking hands spilled wine, dropped plates, invited punishment. The hall around her prepared itself for peace. Long tables had been dressed in dark linen. Black and gold banners hung between the pillars. The smell of pine smoke, beeswax, leather, and roasted meat lay thick beneath the vaulted ceiling. Guards stood along the walls in polished armor. Nobles gathered in quiet clusters, wearing fur cloaks and careful smiles. Peace, Clara had learned, often required more decoration than honesty. She placed the final candle, then turned as if checking the symmetry of the table. Her gaze lifted just enough. The chalk line ended below the eastern balcony. Above it, the velvet curtain had been tied back with a new cord. Fresh rope, too pale, too clean, pulled too tight around the banister. Clara's fingers tightened around the empty candle tray. Her father's voice rose from memory, low and rough from years in the fletching room. An assassin never aims at the man, Clara. He aims at where the man is expected to stand. She looked from the chalk line to the platform, then to the empty place where Alpha King Everett Blackwood would soon sign the treaty. And for the first time that morning, the great hall no longer looked prepared for peace. It looked measured for death. The hall changed before the doors opened. Clara felt it in the servants first. A kitchen boy near the western arch stopped whispering. Two maids carrying folded napkins lowered their eyes at the same time, though no one had told them to. The guards along the walls straightened by degrees, metal shifting softly over leather. Even the nobles seemed to gather their faces into better shapes, smoothing amusement into respect, boredom into attention, fear into something that could pass for loyalty. The Alpha King was coming. Clara stepped back from the signing platform, empty candle tray pressed against her waist. Her eyes lowered because that was what a maid's body did before her mind finished giving the order. Look down. Make room. Become less than a shadow. But she could still see the chalk line. It cut pale across the black stone, half hidden beneath the hem of a councilman's cloak now, still pointing from the platform toward the eastern balcony. A line meant for someone who needed distance, angle, certainty. A line meant for a shot. The great doors opened. Ironvale Hall did not fall silent all at once. It tightened. Voices thinned. Chairs stopped scraping. The music near the hearth faded until the last note trembled in the air and disappeared. Alpha King Everett Blackwood stepped inside. He was larger than Clara expected, though every story about him had used words like large, powerful, impossible, and built for war. Stories had failed. They always did with men like him. He was tall in a way that made the doorway seem poorly designed, broad through the shoulders beneath black leather armor scored with old battle marks. A dark wolf fur cloak fell from his back, heavy and unadorned, and his face had the clean, hard masculinity of a statue carved for a kingdom that did not forgive weakness. Handsome, yes, but handsome was not what made the room yield. It was the stillness. Everett did not rush, did not smile, did not search the hall for approval. His pale eyes moved once across the gathered nobles, the guards, the treaty table, and every person touched by that gaze seemed to remember something about themselves they would rather not test. Clara looked down before those eyes could reach her. Behind him walked Beta Malcolm Graves. Clara noticed the ring first. Black silver, set low on his hand, its surface almost dull beneath the candlelight. Malcolm's thumb brushed it as he crossed the threshold. Once. A habit, perhaps. Or a signal. He was dressed in dark brown leather, elegant enough for court, practical enough to pretend he belonged near danger. His face was calm, his smile measured, his posture loyal from a distance. But his eyes did not stay on the king. They lifted, only briefly, toward the eastern balcony. Clara's fingers tightened around the tray. There, another small wrong thing, placed carefully beside the first. The steward bowed deeply. Your Majesty, Ironvale receives you in peace. Everett gave a slight nod. Then let peace be worth the trouble of gathering for it. A few nobles smiled because kings were safest to admire when they sounded controlled. Clara did not smile. Everett moved toward the signing platform, toward the place the chalk line had chosen for him. Malcolm followed one step behind and to the right, close enough to seem protective, far enough not to block the balcony's view. Above them, behind the eastern curtain, something shifted, a sound so small no noble turned. Clara heard it because maids heard the sounds rooms tried to hide. Rope pulling through wood, fabric brushing stone, the faint breath of weight being settled into place. Everett reached the platform. The chalk line ended beneath his boot. Malcolm touched his ring a second time, and Clara understood, with a coldness that made her whole body still, that the ceremony had not begun yet because the assassin was waiting for the king to stand exactly where he had just stood. Clara had learned to distrust perfect positions. A chair placed too neatly meant someone wanted a guest to sit exactly there. A curtain tied too cleanly meant someone wanted a sight line kept open. A guard standing where light touched his armor just right might not be guarding anything at all. He might be showing the room where not to look. The man on the eastern balcony was standing perfectly, too perfectly. Clara saw him while pretending to gather the spent matches from the candle table. His uniform matched the royal guards below at first glance. Dark leather, iron shoulder plates, black cloak pinned at the throat. But the fit was wrong. Not loose enough to be borrowed from a dead man, not tight enough to be his. His left shoulder pulled when he shifted, as if the armor had been adjusted quickly by someone who cared more about appearance than comfort. A Real guard hated uncomfortable armor. It slowed the arm. Her father had taught her that. Clara lowered her eyes before anyone could follow her gaze. The empty candle tray felt suddenly too loud in her hands, though it made no sound. Across the hall, Alpha King Everett Blackwood stood at the signing platform while councilmen arranged themselves around him like ravens around a battlefield they had not yet admitted was won. The treaty parchment waited on the table. The pen waited beside it. The chalk line waited beneath his boot. Clara moved along the edge of the room, collecting nothing because nothing needed collecting, existing only because servants were allowed to hover near work. Her body knew how to become useful enough to be ignored. One step, lower gaze, half turn, tray against the hip, breathe quietly. The balcony curtain shifted again. This time she saw what moved behind it. Not a full bow. Not yet. Just the curve of dark wood hidden in velvet shadow, drawn back far enough that the string disappeared behind the guard's sleeve. The arrow was already set. Its shaft was narrow, black, almost invisible against the curtain. Only the fletching betrayed it. 3 pale feathers, cut short on one side. Clara stopped breathing. The old fletching room came back to her in one hard flash. Her father's hands rough with glue and ash, feathers lined across the workbench, his knife trimming each vein with patient precision. Loyal guard arrows were balanced clean. Hunting arrows were longer at the tail. Rebel arrows, the ones made for speed in narrow corridors, were cut short on one side so they would correct themselves after passing through fabric. through fabric, like a curtain. Her stomach turned cold. Malcolm Graves touched his ring again. Not idly this time. His thumb pressed once, paused, then pressed again. On the balcony, the false guard's chin lowered a fraction. A signal answered. Clara's gaze snapped to the platform. Everett had not yet taken the pen. He was listening to an elder read the opening words of the treaty, his face still, his shoulders relaxed beneath the black fur cloak. He did not look like a man in danger. That was the worst part. Powerful men often appeared safest at the exact moment someone had finished arranging their death. Clara took one step toward him, then stopped. Malcolm's eyes cut to her. The change was so small anyone else would have missed it. His smile remained polite. His posture remained loyal. But his eyes found the empty tray in her hands, then her face, then the balcony. He knew she had looked. Clara's fingers tightened until the tray rim bit into her skin. If she shouted, Everett might turn toward the sound and give the arrow a cleaner path beneath his ribs. If she pointed, Malcolm could call her hysterical before the guards looked up. If she ran, she would be stopped before she reached the platform. She needed proof. She needed time. She had neither. The elder's voice rose. Let the Alpha King of the Northern Bloodlines set his hand to peace. Everett reached for the pen. Above him, the false guard drew the bowstring fully back. And Clara saw the arrowhead for the first time. Silver, bright as winter, aimed at the king's heart. Clara did the only thing she could do without getting the Alpha King killed. She stepped into the chalk line. Not fully, not enough to seem deliberate. Just one small movement forward. The kind a maid might make when trying to collect a fallen thread or smooth a wrinkle in the carpet before a noble noticed. Her shoe crossed the pale mark and stopped between the signing platform and the eastern balcony. It was a foolish place to stand. That was why everyone saw it. A councilman frowned. The elder reading the treaty faltered for half a breath. One of the guards near the wall shifted as if preparing to remove her. Clara lowered her head immediately, bending with the empty candle tray held against her waist. Forgive me, she whispered. There is dust on the floor. A small ripple of amusement passed through the nearest nobles. Dust. At a treaty ceremony. A maid interrupting kings over dust. Someone laughed softly behind a gloved hand. Clara felt the sound strike her back, but she did not move away. She crouched lower, pretending to wipe at the chalk line with the corner of her apron. If she could smear it, break the mark, confuse the aim even slightly, perhaps the archer would hesitate. Perhaps Everett would step back. Perhaps one heartbeat would become enough. Then Malcolm Graves reached her. His hand closed around her upper arm with courtly gentleness. The kind that left bruises where no one could see. That is enough, he said. His voice was quiet, pleasant, meant for the room as much as for her. A maid does not interrupt the king's treaty. Clara kept her eyes down. My lord, the floor was marked. The floor is stone. There is a line, his fingers tightened. Pain shot through her arm, clean and warning. A chalk line is not your concern. There it was. Not confusion. Not irritation. Knowledge. Clara looked up before she could stop herself. Malcolm's face remained calm, but his eyes had changed. The softness was gone. Behind the polished loyalty and the noble patience was something flat and cold and already prepared to punish her for surviving long enough to notice him. Across the platform, Everett had turned his head. Only slightly. His pale eyes moved from Malcolm's hand on Clara's arm to the tray in her hands, then down to the floor where her apron had smeared part of the chalk. He saw the mark now. Clara knew he did. A man like him did not look twice at nothing, but he did not yet understand what it meant. The elder cleared his throat, desperate to pull the ceremony back into its proper shape. Your Majesty, if we may continue, we may, Malcolm said before Everett could answer. That was another mistake. Small. Almost invisible, but kings noticed when another man answered for them. Everett's gaze sharpened. Malcolm seemed to realize it a breath too late. His grip on Clara loosened, and he offered a smooth bow toward the king. Forgive me, your Majesty. The girl is nervous. The girl. Not maid. Not witness. Not the only person standing between his king and a silver arrow. Clara forced herself to breathe. If she accused Malcolm now, the archer would shoot. If she screamed, Everett might turn. If she tried to point, Malcolm would silence her before anyone looked high enough. So she chose humiliation. She dropped the candle tray. It struck the stone with a bright metallic crash, rolling across the chalk line and spinning toward Everett's boot. Every head turned downward. Every head except Clara's. She looked up. The bowstring on the balcony tightened. Everett followed her eyes. For one heartbeat, the king and the maid saw the same death. Then the elder reached for the treaty pin and unknowingly blocked Everett's path backward. The arrow was ready. There was no time left to warn him. The sound came before the arrow. Not the release. The breath before it. A thin, strained whisper of bowstring pulled to its limit somewhere above the eastern curtain, so quiet it should have vanished beneath the elder's voice, beneath the rustle of noble silk, beneath the metallic roll of Clara's fallen tray across the black stone. But Clara heard it, because her father had taught her that death made small sounds first. The old fletching room returned to her in pieces. Goose feathers between her fingers, bow wax under her nails. Her father standing behind her, guiding her hand as she learned to tell a hunting draw from a war draw by sound alone. A loose string hummed. A wet string complained. A killing string held itself too still just before it sang. This one was ready to sing. Everett Blackwood's eyes were already lifted toward the balcony. He had seen what she had seen, but seeing was not enough. The elder had stepped too close, parchment in hand, blocking the king's clean path backward. Malcolm stood at Clara's side, near enough to grab her again if she moved wrong. The nobles were still staring down at the tray, annoyed by the interruption, blind to the murder waiting above their heads. Clara's heart struck once. Hard. There was no time to explain. No time to ask forgiveness. No time to be small. Everett's hand shifted toward the elder's shoulder, perhaps to move him aside, perhaps to step away from the line. It would not be fast enough. Clara knew that with the terrible certainty of someone who had spent half her life watching arrows become consequences. The silver goblet on the treaty table caught a flash of movement. A shadow behind velvet. The archer's elbow drew back the final inch. Clara stopped thinking. She ran. A maid running in a royal treaty hall was a scandal. Gasps rose before she reached the first step. Malcolm cursed and lunged for her sleeve, but he caught only air and the edge of her apron string. It tore loose behind her. A nobleman shouted for someone to stop her. The steward cried her name, as if naming her could pull her back into obedience. Clara heard none of it clearly. The world narrowed to three things. The chalk line, the king's heart, the silver point waiting above him. Everett turned toward her just as she reached the platform. For the first time, she saw his face not as a distant force entering a room, but as a man close enough to touch. Pale eyes sharp with warning, jaw tightening, one hand rising, not to defend himself, but to stop her from entering danger meant for him. That almost broke her courage. Almost. Clara slammed both hands against his chest and shoved. He moved only half a step. A man like Everett Blackwood was not easily moved by anything, least of all a maid half his size. But half a step was all the chalk line needed to lose him. The bowstring snapped. The arrow came through the curtain like a silver needle tearing through night. Clara felt the impact before she understood pain. It struck high in her shoulder, driving the breath from her body and turning the hall into white silence. Her knees buckled. The candle tray stopped spinning somewhere below. A woman screamed, far away and underwater. Everett caught her before she hit the stone. His arms closed around her with a force that should have frightened her, but did not. His cloak surrounded her. Leather, winter air, smoke, and the sharp scent of silver burning too close. Clara tried to breathe. It hurt. That seemed important. Everett looked down at the arrow in her shoulder, then at the balcony, then back at her. The entire hall had gone still. Clara tasted iron on her tongue and forced one word out, because the truth had not finished arriving yet. Second, she whispered. Everett's eyes changed. A breath later, the second arrow fired. The second arrow did not find flesh. It found the king's chair. Everett moved with Clara still in his arms, turning his body around hers in one hard, controlled motion as the silver shaft cut through the space where his throat had been. The arrow struck the high-backed chair behind him and buried itself deep into the carved black wood. The sound cracked through Ironvale Hall like judgment. Not a scrape, not a warning, a killing blow. The chair split down the center, dark wood opening around the silver point. The treaty parchment lifted in the rush of air, fluttering once before settling beside the ink pot. The elder stumbled backward, face drained of every ceremonial word he had been prepared to say. For 3 breaths, no one moved. Then the truth arrived. It arrived in the line of the second arrow. It arrived in the broken chair. It arrived in the fact that Clara Bennett, a maid with a torn apron string and an arrow in her shoulder, had not thrown herself at a king for attention, panic, or madness. She had stepped into death before it reached him. A guard shouted from below the eastern balcony. "Archer!" The hall erupted. Real royal guards surged toward the stairwell. Nobles scattered from the platform, silk and fur twisting around chairs as they tried to flee without looking cowardly. Someone knocked over a silver goblet. Wine spread across the black stone, running into what remained of the chalk line Clara had tried to smear away. Everett did not release her. His arms held her with terrifying care, one hand braced behind her back, the other pressed near the wound but not against it. His face had gone still in a way that made every other movement in the room seem frantic and foolish. "Do not pull it out," Clara whispered. The words cost more breath than she expected. Everett's eyes dropped to hers. "You know arrows," he said. It was not a question. Clara tried to answer, but pain moved through her shoulder in a white wave, sharp enough to steal language. She gripped the edge of his armor instead, fingers curling against black leather. Above them, a crash sounded from the balcony. A royal guard dragged the false sentry into view and slammed him against the railing. His helmet fell away. He was no guard, not even close. His face was unfamiliar, pale with fear, his borrowed armor hanging wrong across one shoulder exactly as Clara had seen. In his hand was a short black bow. At his wrist was a strip of dark cloth marked with a silver thorn. A rebel mark. The room saw it. A murmur moved through the nobles, fast and frightened. But Clara was looking at the arrow in the chair. Not the shaft, the head. Her father's lessons had taught her that men lied with mouths, but arrows told the truth in metal. Rebel work was rougher, faster, made to kill, not to be admired. This arrowhead was too clean, too balanced. Its base carried a tiny crescent cut beside the socket, almost hidden beneath the binding. Clara knew that mark. She had seen it once on a ring pressed into sealing wax. Her breath caught. "Malcolm," as if hearing his name inside her silence. Beta Malcolm Graves stepped forward. "She planned this," he said. His voice was sharp, too sharp, cutting through the chaos before the king could command it. "She knew there would be a second arrow. She knew where to push you. She ran before anyone else heard a thing." The accusation landed exactly where fear was waiting. Faces turned toward Clara. Suspicion was always faster than gratitude in a room full of cowards. Everett's head lifted slowly. Malcolm pointed at her, his black-silver ring catching the candlelight. "She is no maid. She is part of it." Clara looked at the ring, then at the crescent cut on the arrowhead. The truth came together through pain, clean and merciless. She forced herself to raise one shaking hand toward the broken chair. "That mark," she breathed. "It is not rebel." Everett looked down at her. Clara swallowed against the burn in her shoulder. "It is your Beta's seal." For one breath, no one understood what Clara had said. The words were too small for the size of the room. Your Beta's seal. They should have fallen unnoticed beneath the shouting guards, the scattered nobles, the broken chair, the false archer being dragged down from the balcony with his hands bound behind him. They should have been lost inside pain, because Clara's voice was thin now, scraped raw by the effort of breathing around the arrow lodged in her shoulder. But Everett heard her. That was enough to change the hall. The Alpha King did not look at Malcolm first. He looked at the arrow in the chair, then at the arrow in Clara's shoulder, then at Malcolm's raised hand, where the black-silver ring gleamed beneath candlelight as if it had been waiting years to betray its owner. "Show me the arrowhead," Everett said. The nearest guard froze. Malcolm moved faster than he should have. "Your Majesty, she is wounded and delirious. Every second you listen to her gives the real conspirators time to escape." He stepped closer to Clara, hand outstretched, face arranged into urgent loyalty. "She must be taken below, questioned, restrained if necessary." Everett's arms tightened around her. Not enough to hurt. Enough to make the room understand she would not be handed over. "No one restrains her," he said. The words were quiet. They did not need to be anything else. A royal guard knelt beside the broken chair and carefully worked the second arrow free from the split wood. When he brought it forward, every noble leaned away from the silver point. The metal seemed cold even from across the room, bright and clean and wrong. Everett held out his hand. The guard hesitated. "Your Majesty, silver, give it to me." The guard obeyed. Everett took the arrow by the shaft, avoiding the head, and turned it beneath the light. Clara watched his eyes find the mark. A tiny crescent cut near the socket, almost hidden unless someone knew where a maker would leave proof. Malcolm laughed. Too sharp. Too late. A crescent mark proves nothing. Rebels steal seals. They copy noble work. That girl could have planted it herself. Clara tried to lift her head. Pain punished her for it. The hall blurred at the edges, but Malcolm's ring stayed clear. Black silver, crescent cut, the inner edge worn where a thumb had turned it too often. My lord, she whispered. Everett looked down. Do not speak if it costs you breath. It will cost more if I do not. Something shifted in his face then. Not softness. Not yet. But attention, deep and exact. Clara swallowed. The mark is not stamped. It is cut after cooling. See the uneven bite at the lower curve. A copied seal would press smooth. That one was made by the same hand that shaped the ring. Silence spread. Not all at once. Piece by piece, like frost crossing glass. A councilman stepped closer despite himself. The guard holding the false archer stared at the arrowhead. Even the elder who had read the treaty lowered his eyes to Malcolm's ring. Malcolm's expression hardened. She knows too much, he said. It was meant as accusation. It sounded like confession. Everett slowly lifted his gaze. Yes, he said. She does. Malcolm's mask cracked. He turned toward the guards near the eastern stair. Take her. 2 men moved. Not royal guards. Clara saw it, even through the haze of pain. Their boots were wrong. Their belts tied in the old mercenary knot. Men brought into Ironvale wearing borrowed loyalty. They reached for her. Everett rose. Carefully, still holding Clara against him, he stood to his full height, and the movement alone stopped both men as if a blade had touched their throats. Touch her, he said, and I will remove the hand. No one moved. Then the false archer shouted from the balcony steps, voice breaking under fear. Graves paid me. The room snapped toward him. Malcolm went white. The archer twisted against the guard's grip. He gave the mark. He gave the line. He said the maid would be blamed if anything went wrong. Every face turned back to Clara. She was shaking now, not from fear but from the body's stubborn insistence that pain be heard. Everett looked at her as if the room had vanished for half a second. You knew the seal, he said quietly. Clara's fingers tightened weakly against his armor. My father made arrows for kings, she whispered. And with that, the old truth began to open. My father made arrows for kings. The sentence did something strange to Ironvale Hall. It did not explain enough. It explained too much. Clara felt the shift in the room, even through the pain burning white through her shoulder. The nobles did not know what to do with a maid who could read an arrowhead better than their own guards. The councilman did not know whether to step closer or farther away. Malcolm Graves knew exactly what to do. He tried to bury the truth before it stood upright. Convenient, he said. A servant girl suddenly remembers a noble craft after throwing herself into the path of an assassin's weapon. Everett's gaze did not leave Clara's face. Her name, he said, is Clara Bennett. The correction was quiet. It struck harder than shouting. Malcolm's mouth tightened. Clara tried to breathe carefully. Each breath pulled against the shaft in her shoulder, sending sparks of pain across her ribs. She could feel the silver near her skin, like winter pressing into an open door. Everett still held her, one arm steady behind her back, his body angled so the room would have to go through him before reaching her. No one had ever stood between Clara and a room before. It made speaking easier. And harder. My father was Samuel Bennett, she said. The elder councilman inhaled sharply. A few older guards looked at one another. Everett's eyes changed by the smallest degree. Master Bennett? Clara nodded once. It was all she could manage. Master Fletcher of the old royal guard. The title opened the past like a blade sliding from a sheath. Her father's workshop returned in flashes, feather bundles tied with string, shafts drying near the hearth, glue warming over coals, her father's hands turning deadly things into exact things. He had taught her balance before he taught her letters. He had shown her how a crooked vein could betray a hurried maker, how a socket mark could reveal a patron, how men who ordered arrows for murder often cared more about distance than honor. Then he had been accused. One winter morning, a noble envoy died from an arrow bearing Samuel Bennett's maker's mark. Malcolm Graves, younger then but already rising, had testified that no one else could have made it. The court believed him because it was easier to condemn a craftsman than accuse a noble beta's family. Samuel Bennett was stripped of rank. Clara became a maid. Malcolm became indispensable. Clara looked at the crescent mark on the second arrowhead. "My father did not make the arrow that ruined him," she whispered. "But he made the mold Malcolm copied." Malcolm stepped forward. "Enough." Everett's head turned. The single movement stopped him. Clara forced her injured hand to lift. Her fingers shook, but she pointed at Malcolm's ring. "The crescent inside his seal is damaged at the lower curve. My father broke that mold before he died. He told me if I ever saw that broken crescent again, it meant someone had kept the stolen cast." The captain seized Malcolm's wrist. Malcolm twisted, but the guard was faster. The black-silver ring came free beneath the candlelight. Inside the band, the crescent mark appeared exactly as Clara had described. Clean at the top, bitten unevenly below. A murmur moved through the hall. The false archer began to speak quickly now, fear making him generous. "Graves gave it to me. The arrows, the chalk line, the balcony position. He said the maid knew the hall and would be blamed if she ran." Clara closed her eyes. Not from weakness. From the terrible relief of hearing the lie finally break in someone else's mouth. When she opened them, Malcolm was staring at her with pure hatred. "You should have stayed invisible," he said. Everett lowered the arrow in his hand. "No," he said. "You depended on her being invisible." The words passed through Clara more deeply than pain. The hall was looking at her now. Nobles, guards, servants half hidden behind pillars. Not as a maid who had interrupted a treaty. Not as a girl who had thrown herself foolishly at a king. As the daughter of the man Malcolm had buried. As the woman who had taken the arrow and still named the hand behind it. Everett looked down at her, his voice lower. "You saved my life," he said. Clara swallowed against the burn in her throat. "My father taught me to read what men try to hide." Everett's eyes lifted to Malcolm again. "Then let us read him properly." The captain forced Malcolm to his knees beside the broken chair, the ring and arrow laid before him on the black stone. And seconds after Clara had taken the arrow meant for the Alpha King, the truth finally stood where everyone could see it. Malcolm Graves knelt because the Alpha King's hand forced him there. Not roughly. That made it worse. Everett Blackwood did not drag him down in rage. He did not strike him before the court, did not roar, did not let fury turn the room into something simple enough for cowards to understand. He placed one hand on Malcolm's shoulder, pressed once, and the beta who had stood beside kings for years lowered to the black stone in front of the broken chair. The chair still held the second arrow. Clara could not stop looking at it. The silver shaft trembled faintly where it had split the carved wood. If she had not moved Everett half a step, if the first arrow had found him instead of her, if she had stayed where maids were supposed to stay, that second arrow would have crossed through the soft place beneath his throat. The thought made the room tilt. Everett felt her weight change immediately. His arm tightened around her back, steadying her before she could fall. The pain in her shoulder had become something bright and endless, but his hold was careful, almost impossibly controlled for a man whose face promised violence to everyone else. "Send for the healer," he said. A guard ran. Malcolm lifted his head. "You are making a spectacle over a servant." The hall reacted to the word this time, not with laughter, with discomfort. It was a small sound, a shifting of silk and leather, the first movement of people realizing that the old language might no longer protect them. Everett looked down at him. "The servant took the arrow meant for your king." Malcolm's mouth tightened, because she knew it was coming. "Yes," Everett said. The simplicity of the answer struck the room still. He turned slightly, enough for every noble, guard, councilman, and servant pressed along the pillars to see Clara in his arms. Her torn apron, her pale face, the arrow high in her shoulder, the blood darkening the cream linen of her dress. The hand still curled weakly against his armor because pain had left her nothing else to hold. She knew because she looked, Everett said. She knew because she remembered a floor she had cleaned, a curtain she had dusted, a mark your court ignored because it was beneath their notice. No one spoke. Everett's gaze moved across them like winter crossing water. She knew because her father taught her to read arrows, and you counted on this kingdom forgetting his name. The captain placed Malcolm's ring beside the arrowhead on the stone. The damaged crescent in the seal caught the candlelight. Small, ugly, unmistakable. Everett looked to the false archer, held between two royal guards near the balcony stairs. "Say his name." The archer's face had gone gray. Malcolm Graves. Who gave you the arrows? Malcolm Graves. Who marked the floor? The archer swallowed. His man did. Under his order. Who told you the maid would be blamed? Silence. Everett took one step forward. The archer broke. Malcolm Graves. The words did not echo loudly, but they seemed to strike every stone in Ironvale Hall. Malcolm lunged up from his knees. He made it half a breath before Everett's boot pinned the edge of his cloak and the captain's sword touched his throat. Do not, Everett said. 2 words. Enough. The beta stilled, breathing hard, hatred stripped bare across his face. Clara looked at him through the haze of pain and realized he was not a monster from childhood stories. He was smaller than that. Worse than that. A man who had built his power on silence and expected silence to kneel forever. Her father had died under that silence. She had almost done the same. Everett turned toward the court. Samuel Bennett's conviction is void. His name returns to the Royal Guard records as Master Fletcher, loyal to the crown until death. His daughter will not carry the shame of a crime committed by the man kneeling before us. Clara's breath caught. For years, her father's name had lived inside her like something breakable hidden beneath floorboards. Now the Alpha King had spoken it in front of everyone, and no one dared spit on it. The healer arrived with a leather case and trembling hands. Everett did not immediately give Clara over. He looked down at her first. May he treat you? The question almost hurt worse than the arrow. May he? No one in Ironvale had asked Clara permission for anything that mattered in years. She nodded once. Only then did Everett lower her carefully onto the bench brought near the platform. The healer knelt, cutting fabric away from the wound with professional gentleness. Clara looked away from the arrow in her shoulder and found Everett still standing beside her, close enough that his shadow covered her from the hall. Malcolm laughed bitterly from the floor. Will you crown every bleeding maid now? Everett removed the black wolf fur cloak from his shoulders. The hall went still again. He placed it around Clara, over the torn linen, over the blood, over the life she had nearly lost because everyone else had waited to understand what she had seen at once. No, he said, but I will honor the one who stood between death and me when 30 nobles and 12 guards did not move. Clara's fingers closed weakly around the cloak's edge. It was heavy, warm, real. Everett faced the hall. From this moment, Clara Bennett is under my protection. No one touches her. No one questions her without my consent. No one speaks her father's name with shame again. His voice lowered. Touch her, mock her, or try to silence her, and you answer to me. Along the walls, the servants lifted their eyes. One by one. Kitchen girls, stable boys, maids with cracked hands and careful shoulders. People who had spent their lives learning not to be seen watched a maid wrapped in the Alpha King's cloak while the beta who had mocked her knelt in chains. Clara felt tears rise, but they did not fall. Not yet. Everett looked back at her, and for the first time, his face changed. Not into softness. Something stronger. Recognition. You saved my life, he said quietly. Clara swallowed against the pain. No, she whispered. I saw where death was standing. Everett's eyes held hers. Then from now on, he said, stand where I can see you. And in the middle of Ironvale Hall, beneath torn banners and a broken king's chair, Clara Bennett stopped being invisible. By the time the arrow was removed, Ironvale Hall had forgotten how to pretend. The treaty banners still hung from the pillars. The candles still burned in their iron holders. The long tables still carried polished goblets, untouched bread, and bowls of fruit arranged for a celebration no one wanted anymore. But the shape of the room had changed. Peace had peeled away like paint from rotten wood, and underneath it lay the thing Clara had seen first. A line, a mark, a death arranged neatly enough that important men had mistaken it for ceremony. Clara sat on the bench beside the signing platform with Everett's cloak wrapped around her shoulders and a healer tying fresh linen over the wound. The arrow lay on a silver tray several feet away, dark shaft, pale fletching, crescent-marked head. It looked smaller now that it was no longer inside her body. Almost harmless. That made Clara hate it more. Pain moved through her shoulder in slow waves, deep and hot, but she kept her back straight. Maids learned to stay upright through discomfort. Through hunger, through insult, through rooms where no one noticed they were shaking. This was different, but her body did not know many kinds of survival. It knew only how not to collapse when people were watching. Across the hall, Malcolm Graves stood in chains between two royal guards. No, not stood. He was held upright. That difference mattered. His face had lost its courtly polish. Without the smile, without the calm voice, without the careful shape of loyalty, he looked older, smaller. A man who had hidden behind rank so long that the absence of it left him badly exposed. The captain searched his coat, his belt, his gloves. From the inner pocket of Malcolm's cloak, he drew out a folded parchment sealed in black wax. Malcolm went still. Everett saw it. So did Clara. The captain broke the seal and read silently. His expression hardened by degrees. "Your Majesty," he said, "this is not only tonight's arrangement." Everett's pale eyes did not move from Malcolm. "Read it." The captain hesitated once, then obeyed. The parchment listed names, locations, payments, old dates. Clara heard her father's name before she was ready for it. Samuel Bennett. The room seemed to move farther away. The captain continued, voice low and controlled. 11 years ago, a false arrow bearing Samuel Bennett's mark had been commissioned. A witness had been paid. A guard rotation had been changed. A craftsman had been condemned so Malcolm Graves could remove a man who knew too much about forged weapons. Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of Everett's cloak. For years, she had imagined the truth would feel like light. It did not. It felt like a locked door opening onto a room full of bones. Everett turned toward her. Not fully. Not enough to make the court think his attention had left the evidence. But enough that she felt the question in his silence. "Can you hear this?" Clara gave the smallest nod. She could. She would. The captain finished reading. No one spoke. Then an old guard near the western wall lowered his head. "Master Bennett said the mark was wrong," he whispered. "I remember. He kept saying the crescent was wrong." Clara looked at him. The old guard would not meet her eyes. "I said nothing," he admitted. There it was again. The oldest weapon in every court. Silence. Everett's voice cut through it. "Then today you will." The old guard flinched. Everett faced the hall. "Every person who knew Samuel Bennett questioned that arrow and stayed silent will give testimony before sunset. Every servant who cleaned this hall, every guard who stood below that balcony, every hand Malcolm Graves paid will be heard." A councilman began, "Your Majesty, perhaps after the healer." "No," the word ended him. Everett stepped beside Clara's bench, his shadow falling across the silver tray that held the arrow. "The woman you ignored took the wound meant for me," he said. "She will not be asked to wait while this court makes comfort out of delay." Clara looked at the chalk line, now smeared beneath footprints and wine, then at the servants watching from the doors. For the first time, she saw them looking back. Not at the cloak. At her. Clara drew one careful breath through the pain. "My father kept records," she said. Everett turned to her. Clara's voice was thin, but steady. If Malcolm feared him, there was a reason. "Search the old fletching room." Malcolm's face changed. Only for a second, but the room saw it. And seconds after Clara had taken the arrow, the truth was still coming out. The old fletching room had been locked for 11 years. Clara knew that before the captain sent a guard to find the key. Some rooms did not need chains to stay closed. Shame could seal a door better than iron. Fear could keep dust undisturbed longer than any royal order. And Ironvale Castle had been very good at not opening the places where Samuel Bennett's name still knew how to breathe. The key was brought by an under-steward with shaking hands. He would not look at Clara. That told her enough. Everett walked beside her through the lower corridor, not ahead, not behind. The healer had protested when Clara stood. The wound was fresh, the bandage still warm beneath her dress, the pain sharp enough to make the edges of the world flash white if she moved too quickly. But Clara had spent 11 years carrying her father's silence. She could carry her own body a little farther. Everett seemed to understand that helping her without permission would be its own kind of insult. So he stayed close enough to catch her if she fell, and did not touch her. The corridor narrowed as they descended beneath the main hall. The air changed there. Less beeswax, less perfume, more stone damp, old soot, leather oil, and the faint dry smell of feathers that had somehow survived the years. Clara's fingers curled around the edge of the black cloak at her shoulders. She had not been down here since she was 12. The door stood at the end of the passage. Plain oak, iron latch, no crest, no warning. Her father had never needed grandeur. He had made things that flew straight. That had been his pride. The under-steward fumbled the key into the lock. It turned with a sound like a throat clearing after a very long silence. The door opened. Dust breathed out. Clara stopped at the threshold. For a moment, she was a child again. There was the long workbench beneath the narrow window. There were the shelves where feather bundles had once hung by color and length. There was the old rack for shafts, empty now except for 3 warped pieces of yew. A cracked glue pot sat near the hearth. A stool lay overturned in the corner, exactly where it had fallen the morning guards came for him. No one had cleaned it. That hurt more than if they had. Everett's voice came low beside her. "You do not have to enter." Clara looked at the workbench. "Yes," she said. "I do." She stepped inside. The room accepted her weight with a soft complaint of dust underfoot. The captain and 2 guards followed, careful not to touch anything without instruction. Everett remained near the door until Clara looked back at him. Only then did he enter. She went first to the workbench. Her father had always said the table remembered careless hands. Every nick meant something. Every burn mark. Every groove cut by blade or cord. Clara ran her fingers along the edge, past the place where she had once carved a crooked star and been too ashamed to admit it. Her hand stopped. The star was still there. Beside it, almost hidden beneath dried glue, was a thin seam. Clara's breath caught. "My father hated loose boards," she whispered. "He said they made tools roll." Everett stepped closer. "Then why leave one loose?" Clara pressed her thumb under the seam and lifted. A narrow strip of wood came free. Inside the hollow beneath the bench lay a roll of oilcloth, dark with age but dry. Malcolm, chained between guards in the corridor, made a sound. Not a word. Enough. The captain dragged him into the doorway. Clara unwrapped the oilcloth with hands that wanted to shake and refused. Inside were parchment strips, maker's sketches, seal impressions, and 1 blackened crescent mold split at the lower curve. The same broken mark. The same stolen shape. Her father had kept everything. Everett took 1 parchment and read silently. His face changed by nothing, which meant the anger had gone somewhere deeper than expression. The captain looked over his shoulder and swore under his breath. "What is it?" Clara asked. Everett turned the parchment toward her. It was a record of arrow orders from 11 years ago. Not just names and quantities. Payments. Delivery dates. A private request bearing Malcolm Graves' family seal. For crescent-marked heads. 3 days before Samuel Bennett was accused. The room seemed to tilt, but Clara stayed standing. Malcolm laughed from the doorway, thin and desperate. Old paper. A dead man's scribbles. Clara picked up the broken mold. It fit in her palm like a piece of winter. "No," she said, turning toward him. My father's voice. For the first time since the hall, Malcolm had nothing ready to say. Everett looked at the captain. "Take every record," he said, "and bring the court below if they doubt what was buried here." Then he looked at Clara, not with pity, with the kind of respect that made grief stand straighter. "Your father knew the truth would need a witness," he said. Clara closed her fingers around the mold. "He had one," she answered. And in the dust of the old fletching room, Samuel Bennett's silence finally broke. The court came below because the Alpha King ordered it. That was the only reason. No councilman would have chosen the old fletching room on his own. Truth was easier to discuss beneath banners, with polished floors and enough distance between suffering and judgment to make cowardice sound like procedure. Down here, beneath Ironvale Hall, there was no room for grand language. The ceiling was low. The air smelled of dust, old feathers, dried glue, and the kind of silence that had waited 11 years for someone brave enough to disturb it. Clara stood beside her father's workbench with Everett's cloak around her shoulders and the broken crescent mold in her bandaged hand. The pain in her shoulder had settled into a deep, steady fire. The healer had warned her not to stand too long. He had warned her not to walk. He had warned her not to hold anything heavy. He had not understood that some things hurt worse when left untouched. Malcolm Graves stood near the doorway in chains, guarded on both sides. His face had gone pale in the corridor, but by the time the council entered, he had gathered what remained of his dignity and arranged it over himself like armor. Clara almost admired the effort. Almost. The elder councilman stepped into the room first, lifting his robe to keep the hem from brushing the dusty floor. His eyes moved over the shelves, the bench, the exposed hollow, the parchment strips laid carefully across the table. "This room was sealed after Samuel Bennett's conviction," Everett said. The councilman swallowed. "Yes, Your Majesty. By whose order? The old man looked toward Malcolm before he could stop himself. That was enough. Everett saw it. So did everyone else. Malcolm's jaw tightened. The room was sealed because traitors' tools should not remain in use. Clara looked at the workbench. Her father's tools still lay where they had been abandoned. A trimming knife, a feather clamp, a measuring cord. Small things. Honest things. None of them had betrayed anyone. Men had done that. The captain lifted the first parchment. Order record, he said. Crescent-marked arrowheads requested under a private seal belonging to the Graves household. Date: 3 days before the death of the Western envoy. A murmur moved through the cramped room. The captain lifted another. Sketch of a forged crescent mold. Master Bennett's handwriting notes the lower curve defect and states the mold was stolen from his locked cabinet. He lifted the broken blackened mold from the table. The defect matches the ring recovered from Malcolm Graves and the arrowhead fired at His Majesty tonight. The room grew smaller. Or perhaps the lies did. Clara watched the councilmen look at one another. Some with horror. Some with calculation. Some with the sick expression of men realizing that history had been wrong in a way that might stain their own hands. An old guard near the back stepped forward. His hair was gray now, his face lined, but Clara remembered him. Not his name. His silence. He had stood in the courtyard the morning her father was taken. She remembered his hand on his sword. She remembered how he looked away when Samuel Bennett tried to speak. I was there, the guard said. No one moved. His voice shook, but he continued. Master Bennett said the arrow was wrong. He said the crescent had been cut from a damaged mold. He asked for his records to be checked. Clara's fingers tightened around the cloak. The guard looked at her at last. I did not speak for him. The apology was not enough. Nothing would be enough. But it was a stone removed from a grave that had never belonged over her father. Everett's voice was quiet. Why? The guard lowered his eyes. Beta Graves said anyone defending Bennett would be investigated as part of the plot. There it was. Not loyalty. Fear. Malcolm laughed once, low and bitter. So now fear is proof. No, Clara said. Her voice surprised even her. Everyone turned. She stepped forward carefully, the broken mold held in her palm. Fear is not proof. But this is. The order is proof. The seal is proof. The matching crescent is proof. The hidden room is proof. The second arrow is proof. She looked at the council. And your silence is not proof of his innocence. It is proof of how easily a man with rank can make a room stop looking. No one answered. For once, Clara was grateful for that. Everett moved to stand beside her, not in front of her. The difference passed through the room like a command. By Crown authority, he said, Samuel Bennett's conviction is void. His name is restored to the Royal Guard records as Master Fletcher, loyal to the Crown until death. His property, wages, and honor will be returned to his surviving daughter. Clara closed her eyes. She did not hear the room for a moment. She heard her father instead, not as he had sounded in chains, not as he had looked in the courtyard, but in the fletching room, laughing softly when her first arrow flew crooked and telling her that truth, like a shaft, only needed to be straight enough to find its mark. When Clara opened her eyes, Malcolm was staring at her with hatred stripped clean of polish. You think this makes you noble? He said. Clara looked down at her torn dress beneath the king's cloak, at the bandage on her shoulder, at the dust on her shoes from her father's floor. No, she said. It makes him innocent. Everett turned to the guards. Take Malcolm Graves above. Let every person in Ironvale see what was buried beneath their peace. The guards pulled Malcolm away. This time, the council made space for Clara when she followed. Not because she was carrying candles. Not because she was invisible. Because she was holding the truth in her hand. They brought Malcolm Graves back into Ironvale Hall through the same doors he had entered as Beta. That was the part Clara watched most carefully. The doors had not changed. The black stone had not changed. The banners still hung above the pillars, and the broken king's chair still stood beside the signing platform with the second arrow buried in its split back. But Malcolm had changed inside the room's eyes. Yesterday, his steps had been protected by rank. Now the chains at his wrists spoke louder than any title he had ever worn. Servants lined the walls. No one had ordered them there. Kitchen girls stood beside stable boys. Maids with damp sleeves and laundresses with cracked hands gathered beneath the arches. Even the old understeward remained near the western pillar, face gray with shame, watching as the man he had obeyed for years was forced into the center of the hall. Clara stood beside Everett Blackwood. Not behind him. The healer had wanted her seated. Her shoulder burned beneath the bandage, and each breath reminded her of the arrow that had entered her body because it had missed his. But sitting felt impossible while her father's name was being carried back into daylight. Everett did not tell her to sit. He only stood close enough that if her knees failed, no one else would reach her first. The captain placed the evidence on the treaty table: the damaged ring, the crescent-marked arrowhead, the stolen mold, the parchment orders, and Samuel Bennett's sealed records. Small objects. Quiet objects. They looked almost too ordinary to have destroyed a man's life. Clara understood then that evil rarely needed to look impressive. Sometimes it was a ring turned under candlelight, a chalk line on a clean floor, a room deciding not to ask one more question. Everett faced the hall. Samuel Bennett was loyal to the crown. His conviction is erased. His honor is restored. The man who stole his work, forged his mark, and used his daughter's silence as cover stands before you in chains. Malcolm lifted his head. You think restoring a dead craftsman will save your kingdom? No, Everett said. Listening to the people you taught us to ignore might. The words moved through the servants first. Clara felt it like warmth passing from body to body. Not celebration. Something deeper. The beginning of posture returning to bent backs. Everett turned to her then. The entire hall followed his gaze. Clara hated being looked at. Some part of her always would. Visibility had been dangerous for too long to become comfort in a single morning. But this gaze was different from the noble's curiosity, different from Malcolm's hatred, different from the pity she had feared. They were not looking at a maid who had forgotten her place. They were looking at the woman who had stood in the path of an arrow and named the hand that fired it. Everett removed a small iron badge from the captain's evidence tray. It had been cleaned, but the edges were still dark with age. A Fletcher's mark. Her father's mark. He held it out to her. This belongs to you. Clara stared at it. Her fingers trembled when she took it, not from weakness this time, but from the weight of something returned too late and still returned all the same. She closed her hand around the badge. Then she looked at Malcolm. For 11 years, she had imagined what she would say if the truth ever stood between them. She had imagined anger, accusation, 1,000 words sharpened in the dark. Only one sentence came. You failed to bury him. Malcolm's face twisted. Everett gestured once, and the guards dragged him away. No dramatic final curse followed. No last attempt at dignity. Only chains scraping over stone, fading toward the lower cells. When the doors closed behind him, Ironvale Hall remained silent. Then the old guard who had admitted his silence stepped forward. Slowly, painfully, he lowered himself to one knee before Clara. Forgive me, he said. Clara looked at him for a long moment. No, she said softly. The hall went still. I cannot give you that today. His head bowed lower. But you can speak now, Clara continued. For every name he buried. For every servant he used. For every truth this hall called inconvenient. The old guard nodded once, tears standing in his eyes. Then, one by one, the servants lifted their eyes. Everett's cloak rested heavy on Clara's shoulders. Her father's badge lay warm in her palm. The arrow wound hurt. The grief hurt more. But beneath both was something steadier than comfort. Purpose. Everett looked down at her, his voice low enough that the court had to strain to hear. Where will you stand now, Clara Bennett? She looked at the chalk line, smeared but still faintly visible beneath the footprints of kings, cowards, and servants. Then she stepped over it. Where death is expected, she said. So someone sees it first. For the first time, Everett smiled. Small, brief, real. And in Ironvale Hall, beneath torn ceremony and restored truth, the maid who had taken the arrow meant for the Alpha King no longer stood where she was placed. She stood where she chose.